အခုကျွန်တော် studio ထဲကိုဖိတ်ခေါ်ထားတဲ့သူကတော့ Global Justice Center ရဲ့အဖွဲ့အစည်းကိုတည်ထောင်ပြီးတော့မှဥက္ကဋ္ဌဖြစ်ဆောင်ရွက်နေတဲ့ Mrs. Janet Benshoof ဖြစ်ပါတယ်။သူဟာကမ္ဘာနိုင်ငံတချို့မှာဒီလူခွင့်ရေးချိုးဖောက်မှုတွေလူသားဖြစ်မှုကိုစန့်ကျင်ကျူးလွန်တဲ့ပြစ်မှုတွေကိုစောင့်ကြည့်နေပြီးတော့မှစီရင်ခံစာတွေရေးသားထုတ်ပြန်နေတဲ့သူတွေဖြစ်ပါတယ်။ဒါအပြင်သက်ဆိုင်ရာဒီအစိုးရတွေနဲ့ဒီလူခွင့်ရေးလှုပ်ရှားမှုအဖွဲ့တွေဒီကိစ္စနဲ့ပတ်သက်လို့ဘယ်လိုအရေးယူကင်တွယ်သင့်တယ်လဲဆိုတာအကြံပေးနေတဲ့သူလည်းဖြစ်ပါတယ်။သူကမြန်မာနိုင်ငံနဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးတော့လည်းပဲဒီစီရင်ခံစာတွေသူတနာစာတမ်းနဲ့အများကြီးရေးခဲ့ပြီးတဲ့သူဖြစ်ပါတယ်။အခုသူ့ကိုကျွန်တော် studio ဖိတ်ခေါ်ပြီးတော့မှသူ့ရဲ့လုပ်ငန်းအကြောင်းမြန်မာပြည်လူခွင့်ရေးအခြေအနေအကြောင်းမေးမြန်းမှာဖြစ်ပါတယ်။ Welcome to the program. Firstly, I'd like to ask you, to introduce yourself, what you're doing, especially with the focus on Burma.
Yes. Well, Shezudin Bade, thank you very much for having me here, Ken. I really regard the Voice of Burma as a leading voice of freedom for the world, not just Burma. And I'm very honored to be here. My name, as you said, is Janet Benshoof, and I'm a lawyer and an expert in international law. The Global Justice Center, which I am president of, is an organization that advocates for human rights of all people, but our particular focus is international law expertise. So we're not political. We take positions and principles on enforcing all those laws on paper.
International law focusing on human rights.
Human rights, yes. And we want to take those laws that are just sitting on paper and put them in practice. And we have a particular priority for Burma, because Burma is a country in this world that all the laws on paper have never reached the people of Burma in practice.
How do you assess the human rights situation in Burma today? So there has been any improvement since this new government came into power about a year ago?
I think we see definite openings in the political sphere as far as discussions and media. There's no human rights improvement as long as you're a country in armed conflict and there's continued deaths and torture and there has never been any accountability for crimes. I don't think you can really say human rights have improved.
But there are some improvements in the political arenas, like releasing political prisoners, and even Aung San Suu Kyi's party has been allowed to re-register, and then she is preparing to contest in the election. So despite of such improvement in the political areas, there's no such improvement in human rights?
Well, I think we're talking a little apples and oranges is what we say, because definitely there's some openings in the political area and those should be applauded. But in the context of my work, which is international law, until I see a judicial system that enforces international law, that's what I consider the measures of human rights, that they are enforceable by the common person, that they are enforceable. I mean, it's one thing releasing prisoners. First of all, they should all be released, including all of your journalists. And secondly, those prisoners did not commit crimes. It's not like they imprisoned someone who committed a crime and then they repented. Those prisoners were victims of crimes. Those were terrible crimes. Many people died in prison. So I want to see those prisoners out, and I want to see them get reparations, and I want to see their jailers held accountable. That is the full scope of human rights. But I welcome each step. But, I want to see that there's the full scope.
Yeah, I believe you are more concerned with the serious violations, crimes happening against the ethnic people and ethnic women. So are these crimes, can be considered like a genocide or crime against humanity and under international law?
Yes. I think when people use the term human rights, they include all human rights, but my particular focus of my organization right now are on the kinds of human rights that are absolute crimes under international law, and so they're not subject to political discussion. So I'm looking at the crimes, and Burma is a country in armed conflict. It's covered by the Geneva Conventions. And we believe there are ongoing crimes of war crimes, genocide, and crimes against humanity. And even if fighting stops, it is still a violation if you don't have accountability. I mean, even after World War II, people were looking for Nazi war criminals in Australia and the United States because not letting people get away with horrible crimes against people is part of enforcing international law. So I would be saying the same thing to you if Aung San Suu Kyi were president. You know, even if she were president tomorrow, I would be talking about the victims' rights, with all due respect.
So there is now a movement globally regarding, investigation into the serious crimes committed in Burma, what they call International Commission of Inquiry. But some people say that this movement is all right as long as it is just for inquiry, because they don't want jeopardize current political change by putting pressure too much on the regime. So they agree the inquiry, but they disagree prosecution or referral to International Criminal Court. How do you think about this argument?
Well, I come to this argument as an international law expert, and that's impossible. You know, there's a duty to prosecute under international law. So what what policymakers might say is not consistent with the law of nations. And I think if you asked anyone, including Aung San Suu Kyi, if she wanted to enforce Burma's treaty laws, the law of nations, the answer would be yes. So we have very serious legal obligations that all states have to comply with, including genocide and the Geneva Conventions. And all states have to cooperate in taking measures to ensure that Burma does also, regardless of who's in politics.
Can you give some example? What kind of crimes are the most serious one in Burma happening these days?
Well, I want to focus on something that is sort of an undisputable obligation of states towards Burma, and that's the duty to prevent genocide. Genocide's a very unique crime focused on ethnic people, and you don't need numbers. You can just have one act of genocide, and it's genocide. And
are you saying that genocides are happening in Burma these days?
Well, let me get to that.
Okay.
First of all, what's unique about the crime of genocide is that there's two duties on all states. Right in the title of the treaty, it says to prevent and to punish. So the duty is on all states in the world to take some measures. Now, I'm not saying criminal accountability, I'm not saying invasion, I'm saying some measures to prevent genocide once a risk is known from any place in the world. And in 2011, for the very first time, Burma is #1 in the world of all countries at risk of genocide.
Yeah, I see your report here. Burma is even higher than Sudan, Somalia, Congo, Pakistan, Zimbabwe.
Yes.
That's quite serious. So how do you come to that conclusion?
Well, we come to that just by using the global indices that put risk of genocide that everyone accepts and that are used by the United Nations. So I think this is pretty undisputable. But what this does is every duty, like we're sitting in Norway now, so Norway has an obligation to do something to prevent genocide, and that's one part of the obligation, prevent and punish is the other. And I think what's interesting is that in 2004, after Rwanda, 55 countries gathered and they signed something called the Stockholm Declaration. And all of the countries and all the countries in the EU said that they would absolutely take measures to prevent genocide once any country showed that there was a risk. So I think this is one example of an absolute international law obligation that all states should pay attention to now, and that isn't inconsistent with talking to Suu Kyi or her running for office or anything. I mean, that's very welcome. But, democracy is not a get-out-of-jail-free card for war criminals or for the law of nations. It's a sign of democracy. It isn't contrary to movements to democracy.
Yeah. So let's say there is a clear evidence that genocides or crimes against humanity are happening in Burma. What should be the process, to prosecute those responsible for such crimes? Because Burma is not a signatory to ICC.
Right. Well, it's not me that's saying there are crimes. The International Red Cross has only 4 times in its entire history made public the fact that there are war crimes occurring or crimes against humanity or serious crimes, and that they asked the public to do something 4 times, and one of those times is Burma. And they did this in July 2007, and nobody did anything. But there's a whole standard the Red Cross follows before they will come public, and that is that they have personally observed crimes against humanity or war crimes or genocide. So it's very